part of the research here was done by Rabbi Mendel Dubov, and I really found it interesting because the Haftorah reading for the last day of Pesach is Isaiah the 10th chapter, verse 33 to 12:6. And the story is pretty familiar, but it's the way Rabbi Mendel connects the whole pieces together. I thought this is really informative and a very good way for us to understand how we fit in. I had a recent call from a man in South Africa, actually an email, and he was asking, hey, when Messiah comes, is he going to be a man? That's first. And if he is going to be a man and he's only going to be from the line of David, which means he's going to be a king for Israel, and he's going to be the Messiah for Israel. Now, what about my people in South Africa? What about my family members? How does that help us? It's a really good question because, you know, at some level, I think that because we've seen a co-opting of Jewish ideas in Scripture to say that it's something else. Well, now when people begin to learn the truth that he is King Messiah, he's the king of the Jewish people, then where does that leave the nations? And I was so happy to be able to refer to him and say, well, the Messiah is going to not only be for the king of the Jewish people, but he's also going to bring a peace to the world. And your family will be able to experience peace. He says, well, what happens if they're not Jewish or they're not B'nai Noach? What does that mean for them? Very another good question. And I said, well, he's coming to bring peace for all mankind, and judgment will come to every human being based on their actions, what they have done. And if they've lived a righteous life, they've done well, they've given charity, they're going to be judged on based on what they know. Hopefully it was good enough for him because he didn't respond back, so I assumed that answers it. But there is a connection with the story in Isaiah, the 10th chapter. And he was the prophet that was alive during Sennacherib, the king of Assyria at the time. He led a powerful army west of his empire, threatening to basically overturn Judea. Now, he had never personally seen Jerusalem. And it said that at the time that he got there, King Hezekiah had, as they were being warned that the Assyrian armies were coming, Isaiah told Hezekiah, everything's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. When Assyria threat came closer, they realized that something was odd because the city didn't look as menacing and big as they thought it was going to be. As a matter of fact, his comment to his legions said to them, it says, let us stay here overnight, and tomorrow each one of you will remove one stone from the wall and we'll continue on our journey. So it was like not a big deal. But something happened by the hand of God that was incredible. And why is this Haftorah read on the last day of Pesach? And we talk about the Exodus out of Egypt as this past glorious event that inspires us all. And when we do Passover and we eat of the bitter herbs and we talk about the slavery and we talk when the Jewish people were slaves and then when they were liberated and they were given the Torah, in a few weeks we will celebrate Matan Torah and we'll celebrate the Shavuot. This is going to be a fantastic time, right? But where does this leave the rest of us, guys that are just sort of hanging out on the fringe? Well, the story that is found in Isaiah says that the night that they camped out on this sort of overlook to see Jerusalem, called a knob, like a little high point, it says that was the first night of Passover. And as the army slept that night, an angel of God was dispatched and killed 185,000 Assyrian men. Now think about this. What does that sound familiar? It's like the death of the firstborn. I had a good discussion with Rabbi Uzziah Daniel this week. And we were talking about the fact that Paro didn't die, so he wasn't the firstborn. right? Which, this is the reason why he let Moses' people go and said, get out of here, because now Moses is a threat to his kingdom, because Moses could have taken power and been legitimate king of Egypt. And was like, you need to hit the road. So it was all about this whole power struggle that was going on. Pharaoh wasn't the firstborn, and that's why he wasn't killed in this whole thing. Firstborns were considered deities at the time. But what made this whole Exodus thing really huge is when they took a very God figure, a deity figure, and raised it out in the front yard for everybody to see, and then cooked it on a fire, and 2 or 3 families came by and ate the whole thing, or one big family, and they ate it all. They consumed the whole thing. The whole thing was put on a spit and cooked at one time. I mean, can you imagine in the face of all the Egyptians?
Didn't they just do it in Goshen? Didn't they do it at their household?
Yes, but all the Egyptians knew what they were doing.
But it wasn't in their face.
No, it wasn't in their face, but it was clearly, everybody knew that they were cooking sheep. So the ram god was what they worshipped. But what was the firstborn? A sheep, a lamb. So they took the firstborn of the ram god and said, look, we'll prove that he has no power, because we're going to take the sheep, or the little lamb, and we're going to eat it, roast it, eat it. Now, powerful thing. There was a Passover that night. But even in the story of the Haftorah, there's a Passover. What was the Passover? Is that this angel of God comes and passes over Jerusalem and hits 185,000 men. The bulk of the army in Judea was destroyed, and obviously at the time Judah was saved. The Code of Jewish law states that because this miracle transpired on Pesach, we read this passage on the last day. Upon closer examining, however, it seems clear that this cannot be the entire reason. Tonight we're going to discover why is this read on the last day of Passover. First of all, the story has a certain connection to the first day of Passover rather than the second Passover. Second, and more crucially, only the 3 verses in the reading deal with this theme, and they are only the coda of the entire chapter devoted the rise and fall of the Assyria, including direct prophecies about Sennacherib's downfall at Jerusalem. After these first 3 verses, the rest of the Haftorah speaks about the days of Moshiach. Just this one little mention, all of a sudden the rest is about the days of Moshiach. I don't know if you guys read this, that the UN decided on the first day of Passover to call all of its representatives, all the UN representatives, to include the Israeli delegation, in a discussion about the cruel way Israel is treating the Palestinians. Doesn't this sort of sound like the same thing? They, on the first day of Passover, what do you want to do? Let's call them in so they can have Passover. And of course, all of the Assyrian army of the time would be equal to the great Ottoman Empire, the Persian Empire, etc., etc. And these same people are involved in the same kind of goofiness that we see today. So it should tell us, if the same sort of conditions exist now as it did back then, it's the same mentality that says, Israel's just this little tiny place, but it deserves to be destroyed because it's the bane of all of our existence. It's the same thing that's happening today. Now, it is fascinating to note that the ultimate connection of this reading, the last day of Passover, began to emerge only in the recent generations in the light of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. So prior to the Baal Shem Tov, this Haftorah portion wasn't read. Why is it read now and more prominently read? Because it is in these last generations that we're putting and holding on to hope that Hashem, if you've done this for the people of Israel in Egypt, surely you'll do this again. And not as just a hope, but as a promise, because the prophet spoke about this very same thing. The central idea is that Passover in its essence celebrates redemption. This is what it's about, deliverance and redemption. The beginning of the Jewish redemption occurred when the exodus from Egypt thus began the Jewish journey, a journey whose destination is the final complete redemption. The first day of Passover, said the chassidic masters, quote, are the festival for the redemption of Egypt, for a festival for the redemption of Egypt. The last day of the festival is for the final redemption. The reason why we have two Passovers, you understand, you have the two Passovers. Now we understand it's to give a person an opportunity if they couldn't participate in the first one. But this whole idea, there is going to be two Passovers. There's going to be a final one that takes place as well. So this is why that I'm hoping that in this class that we encourage people to realize that we're very close to this. I had someone the other day posted something on Facebook, says this whole what do they call it? This whole Goisha obsession about Judaism will surely start washing out sooner or later, right? He's thinking it's a fad, right? But the reason why I know that it's not a fad is because now we have very serious contemplation within the Knesset to develop ways so that we can start bringing everybody into the nation of Israel that have a connection to Judaism, whether by B'nai Noach, etc. That's like monumental. It's mind-blowing. The Baal Shem Tov taught that on this day, a revelation of the light of Moshiach comes forth and is available to every person. Also indicated the custom to eat the Seudah Moshiach, or the Feast of the Moshiach. Have you guys heard this? It was also called, this last day was the Feast of Moshiach, during the final moments of the holiday, reading this Haftorah portion on the last day. Passover is a reflection of what this day is actually all about, what the last day is about. When I say last day, I'm also using it as a reference to the end of days. You understand what I'm saying? So the last day of Pesach representing the last days before Moshiach. Let's first look at the connection between the Feast of Moshiach and the Moshiach, the man. The Haftorah begins with the decisive downfall of Assyria. And we must begin to sort of cognitively understand the fact that it was the Assyrians who dealt with the Jewish people, one of the heaviest blows in all their history. It was they who then exiled the 10 lost tribes. The vast majority of the Jewish people, it was decimated and spread out all through Asia Minor and Europe. It was all good for Isaiah to reassure the king Hezekiah that he would be saved from the Assyrian onslaught, but what would become of the Jewish people, most of whom were not so fortunate, thus explains Rashi, is why the prophet begins to point to and to speak about the future. Now, what does he speak about? Is the very famous quote about the staff that will emerge from the stump of Jesse. I have a lemon tree that a dear friend of ours gave us 6 or 7 years ago, right? And it was what do you call the lemon trees? They're dwarf, but they have full-size lemons. Mm-hmm. And we actually had some, and they were so incredible. Remember Miss Addie? I don't know if you remember her. Mm-hmm. From Miss Addie's own tree. And she brought it from seeds that were given to her. And so it's been a labor of love to see this thing try to grow, because it's been hard. For some reason, we just had bad winter, and it froze. I thought I was going to die, et cetera, et cetera. And so we decided last summer, let's put it in the ground, and let's see. So it grew about 3 feet. Like, yay, it's grown 3 feet. And then we had this cold weather, and I thought, it's dead. So we carefully dug around it. We put citrus fruit fertilizer around it. We've been watering it. And now it's a little bush about that big and that tall right on the ground. But it's emerging, and I'm thinking, it won't be long, I'm going to taste fruit from it. And we have to understand that even though we don't see it, there is a stump of Jesse that exists. We know that there are people that are descendants of King David that live today. The destiny of Davidic kings, Jesse is being sold like he's the father. He is the one that we're going to see the Mashiach come down from. So for millennia, Israel will have no king and has had no king. But then the shoot will sprout its roots. This is the cool thing. The tree that is non-existent on the surface actually existed the whole time under the surface. And I've had individuals tell me that, as a matter of fact, I had one guy who was a Christian pastor said, well, there's no records because all of the records of the Davidic kingdom was destroyed on the second temple. Have you guys heard this? Yeah, they quote it as fact in their teaching. And I said, well, I don't know if you know, but that's factually incorrect because all the records didn't exist there. You understand? It's like families had their records. So the whole time this shoot has existed. At the appointed time, a shoot, according to the prophet, will appear, creating a new beginning for the house of David and the Jewish people. Now, we echo this in the Talmudic passage in our prayers. It says this, quote, David, king of Israel, is alive and enduring. So today we know that the lineage of King David exists, and there is someone that is going to rise up out of it. And it's not according to our time schedule. It's not according to the rabbinic time schedule or the Knesset. It's God's timetable. The king of the future will be endowed with the spirit of the wisdom of God, it says, and will be endued with knowledge and wisdom, power and counsel and strength. And all of the nations will consult with him about how they are to rule their nations. So South Africa will remain South Africa. The United States will remain the United States, and the UK, etc. The only difference is we will be seeking wisdom from Moshiach to teach the nations about how to run the nation according to the Sheva Mitzvot. Can you imagine receiving the technology that Israel has that caused the deserts to bloom, that would now help Sudan and most of the African countries that struggle in its economy to finally do prosperous for the first time? The king, when he finally will be able to issue truth and possess the capacity to penetrate through all levels of rebellion and darkness, and he will judge and rule with true justice and righteousness. That in itself is enough for me to be really excited about. Peace. Let's talk about peace. The famous scripture says, now we've all heard it's misquoted, the lion will lay down with the lamb, but in reality, what does it say? The wolf will live with the sheep.
Right.
Now, this is in this portion. The prophet cites many examples of how in the future even animals will neither injure nor destroy. It seems that animals maybe possibly become vegetarian. I don't know all about that. You know, whatever can happen, happens. Well-known statement by Rambam. And other authorities is that this is meant as a metaphor as to the way the nations will exist. The fighting that's going on in Syria and the complexity of ISIS and Turkey and the Kurds in Syria and all the different armies. I counted it one time, me and Jerry Gordon, about the different factions, military factions in Syria fighting, and there were something like 22 different military factions. I mean, that's just seems so like hopeless. But there's going to be a time that's all going to change. I'm not sure how, but obviously the Mashiach's going to have the ability to bring down some very powerful judgment against those who are wicked. Now, it says, a well-known statement by Rambam, and I'll read this, and other authorities, is that when it's meant that the metaphor to complete peace that will prevail in the days of Mashiach, especially when Israel and the nations, other authorities, however, understood this to be literal, and they talk about the nature of godliness will cause even the animals to not eat each other. It doesn't matter to me. Honestly, if all the animals are vegetarian, that's great, okay? But I'm not sure that the very nature of creation is going to change, because that's how God created it in the beginning, unless animals were vegetarian in the garden. Yeah. Right?
I was thinking maybe the fall.
And that's very possible. Maybe the fall created that. So I get that. Defining verse for the description of the Messianic era can be found in these words. I love this. For the earth will be filled, I love this, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God, like the waters cover the seabed. One of the greatest comebacks or disputations for someone who says that the Messiah has already come is this verse here. Because truly the knowledge of God has not covered the earth to that extent. Because if there were so, you wouldn't have had to send missionaries for the last 2,000 years to tell people. This submerged A submergence in godliness will be the cause of all good that will dominate in the world to come, in this time. There'll be a return of the Jewish people to Israel and unity. And if it's anything like what we're seeing now already in the newspaper, and I think I posted on NETIV, that a very serious organization, a non-government entity, an NGO is what they call them, has been working with the Knesset to try to enact some levels of ease for people to be able to migrate to Israel and to get their citizenship, regardless of their religious status. Yeah, like instead of if they're conservative or reform, it's not going to be that difficult. Now, they're going to have the big fight with the Orthodox community. I get that. But at some point, there's going to be this whole point of unity. I don't know what that means, honestly, but I am sure that people who are the most liberal and those who are the most ultra Orthodox, Moshiach will be the balancing factor in the whole thing, because both sides will go, oh, well, he's actually the boss, and it's not us. And where one says we have to set the rules and make the determination for all Jews, and the other one says nobody sets the rules except for me as an independent Jew, Moshiach is going to make that obviously clear. Only once did a redemption occur for the entire people, the exodus from Egypt. Every other time of deliverance since then affect only a part, sometimes even a very small part of the people. When Moshiach comes, however, no Jew will be left behind, and no righteous non-Jew will be left behind. Not one. Not one righteous Jew, I'm saying righteous non-Jew will be, did I say Jew first? I meant righteous non-Jew will be left behind. Every person, even from the farthest corners of the earth, will be brought back home. 150 years ago, that would have been impossible. Now, with modern transportation and communication, it's not impossible at all to think that that's going to happen. As with the world at large, the Jews also have suffered from inner splits and strife. At the time when this prophecy was delivered, it was the terrible rift between Judah and the rest of the tribes of Israel, which dominated the Jewish political and social scene. And these divides will entirely dissolve and disappear in the time to come. Even though Moshiach will be a descendant from King David, a member of the tribe of Judah, he will nevertheless be completely accepting and in loving of the entire people. His attitude will be, there will be one people, and there will be acceptance of all. When I watched the video of the local Chinese Jewish community davening for Pesach, I was like, that's amazing to me. I mean, of all places, and they're reading in Hebrew, which you can understand. And then just 2 weeks ago, we had this whole tribe of a whole plane load of tribe of Manasseh, right? Manasseh, right?
The name Manasseh from India.
Right. We're walking through the airport and singing Haktiva. We're seeing it. It's happening right here before our eyes. And so right at this very time, this verses talks about the 7 lands to which the members of the 10 tribes will be exiled. When we talk 7 lands, we're talking about the 7 continents or regions of the world. Among these were Egypt and the territories along the Euphrates River. So in an invocation of the splitting of the Red Sea at the Exodus, God will split the Gulf of the Sea of Egypt and the river into 7 paths, enabling the Jews to return to their land with ease. Now, what does that mean? Does this mean, is this a metaphor to say that all continents of the world will make it very easy for Jews to return home? Yes. Does he have to have a Gulf of the Sea of Egypt and 7 paths to allow people to come home physically? I doubt that seriously, but you know, if that's the case, but we're living in a modern age. People can hop on a plane and fly to Israel. In the breaking statement, when we talk about a song of gratitude, it says, the prophet declares, you will say on that day, I thank you, God, for you were angry with me One way of reading this verse is that in some way we will not only understand the suffering of the exile, but we will even thank God for it. When we think about the frustration, and my goodness, guys, I hear the frustration of people every week that are in the nations that are alone. They don't have a community like we have. Their only study is what they can get on their mobile phone. Some of these people in third world countries don't have a computer. And so all they get is on their mobile phone. One person contacted me from Kansas. They don't have internet access where they're at. And so they use their mobile phone and they download all of the lectures audio file. It's much easier, faster for their phone. And it doesn't take as much bandwidth to do that. And so you hear these people's hearts cry out that is there any hope for me? What am I going to get left behind? Am I going to be one of these people that God's not going to remember me in Kansas or Uganda or Sudan? Is God even going to remember me as a poor slave that's been sold into slavery in a modern time? Is Hashem going to really remember me that I wanted to be a righteous person and I've struggled in a society that has broken me down and held me captive and keep me from being able to worship God freely as I want? And I'm here to say God will not forget a single soul. And that's the beauty of Pesach that we're serving here. It's not just a Jewish thing. It's a world thing. The next Passover that takes place, the next deliverance that takes place will be so monumental that the world will gasp at the beauty of this. And this is what will turn the hearts of men. I am serious. I do believe that every atheist that doesn't believe in God, it will immediately change their heart and mind. Why? Because what are they looking for? They're looking for truth and authenticity. Now, there are some who don't care about truth and they're just in denial of everything. But I'm talking about generally, most atheists, I think they just want to know what's true. And if they can't prove it, they don't see it with their own eyes, they can't comprehend it at some level of their reason, then I'm just an atheist, or agnostic. But all of the questions will be gone at that point. And so I want to say to those who are watching, if you're worried about friends and family and people that you're concerned about them being able to do it, they'll get it. They'll get it. It's going to happen. And that's the beauty of the whole thing. That concludes this year. So we have questions, answers. Now would be a good time to do that.
What about